Alright, two things before we get started on this one. One, I apologize for the children screaming around in the background. Two, it's really long. I'm sorry about that too. I'll try to make it as small as possible. Alright, here we go. Formed element. So we already talked about plasma as being the non-living portion of your blood, so now we're going to talk about the living portion. The formed elements have two main types of blood cell, or two types of cells: erythrocytes, otherwise known as red blood cells, and leukocytes, which are otherwise known as white blood cells. Now we do have these little things called platelets, which are like cell fragments, so they're kind of considered live-ish. They're called formed elements because they come from living things, living cells, but these are the two functioning living cells. Alright, so today's note 6-3 will be all about the red blood cells, and then 6-4 will all be about the white blood cells. Alright, here we go. Red blood cells, like I said, also known as erythrocytes. Erythro is just Greek for red, cyte for cell. The shape, as we're pretty well familiar with, kind of looks like a biconcave disc. Concave means dips in, so biconcave dips in on both sides. They live about 100 to 120 days. They have lost their nuclei in just about all their, gosh dang it, about all their organelles, but they have lots and lots of hemoglobin inside of them. They also have something called spectrin. A spectrin is a protein that helps to let them be bendy and flexible. Alright, what do? Their job is to pick up the oxygen inside of the lung. So here's a lung, and I'm writing with my thingy just isn't working, so this is on my little bitty mouse pad on my computer. So here's the lungs right here. Oh, hey, look, it says so right there. And so what happens is that the oxygen goes in like that and gets picked up, while CO2 gets out like that. So they pick up oxygen from the lungs and they release it to the tissues. They also pick up CO2 from the tissues and bring it back to the lungs to expel. The shape of the cell, the way that is biconcave, allows for a larger surface area for greater gas exchange, and inside of the cell contains about 97% hemoglobin, which is this little red thing right there, to allow maximal oxygen capacity. Okay, what are some functions of erythrocytes? Well, like we said, it carries, dear Lord, carries oxygen, and it's due to this protein called hemoglobin. So it's a protein that makes blood red and binds easily to oxygen. So this is what hemoglobin actually looks like right there. As you can see, it's quite crazy. It's actually made up of 4 different molecules, 4 different proteins that are mushed together. So we can see there's an alpha chain, a beta chain, another beta chain, and another alpha chain. That just has to do with the way that the structure is bent and folded. And then inside we have this little blue thing right there called a heme group. There's the heme of hemoglobin. And then in the middle of that is that little red thing right there, and that's one molecule of iron. And so it's this heme group in the iron which specifically grabs onto the oxygen. Now, since we see we have 4 heme groups, you can see that each hemoglobin can carry 4 molecules of oxygen, and there's hundreds of these hemoglobins in the red blood cell, so you can carry lots and lots of oxygen. So hemoglobin protein makes blood red. That's usually due to the iron, and binds easily to oxygen. It's made out of the protein globin. So each of these are globins, and they're bound to the red heme pigment, which is the heme group inside. Globin is 4 protein chains, each bound to a heme group, so each of these is a globin. And each red blood cell can bind about, oh, I said hundreds, I lied, about 1 billion molecules of oxygen. So, each one oxygen has a really good job. Okay, when hemoglobin picks up oxygen, it turns into oxyhemoglobin and turns this really pretty bright ruby red. When it drops off the oxygen, it becomes deoxy, without oxygen hemoglobin, which is dark red. So thus the 2 colors of blood that we had mentioned. Yes, it is 5:45. 20% of carbon dioxide binds to the amino acids in the hemoglobin molecule to form something called carbaminohemoglobin. That's kind of fun to say, carbaminohemoglobin. Eh. So here's a little picture kind of showing how this happens. So when a cell produces CO2 from the Krebs cycle, the electron transport chain, some of it goes into the plasma and just kind of chills in there. Some of it goes into the red blood cell, combines with hemoglobin to form carbaminohemoglobin, and then some of it also forms carbonic acid, which makes the blood slightly acidic, and that's why we have buffers and things to make sure it doesn't get too acidic. If your blood gets too acidic, bad things begin to happen. Okay, how do we make our red blood cells? Well, the production of erythrocytes has to do with hematopoiesis. Hemato, blood, poiesis, formation of. It's also referred to as erythropoiesis. It's a formation of red blood cells, and it occurs, as we remember from the bone chapter, in the red bone marrow, which in adults we find in flat bones and in your sternum, in your hips, and stuff like that. Dear Lord, I'm going to smother those children out there. They are so loud. It's only 3 of them. No, there's 4 of them. Still, it's really loud. Your marrow, your bone marrow, makes about an ounce of new blood each day. That's about 28 grams. So, just a small, maybe about 20 mils or so. That's about 1 billion new cells, though, each day. Your hematopoietic stem cells, or hemocytoblasts, are you getting the hint? There's a lot of vocab here, are the one cell that can turn into any other type of cell. White blood cell, red blood cell, platelet, doesn't matter. So these are the important blood cells. These are the ones that if you hear about bone marrow transplants, this is what we're giving that individual. All right, erythropoiesis begins when a myeloid stem cell is transformed into a pro-erythroblast. Pro, like prophase or prokaryote, means first. So you can kind of remember pro means first. So we have this stem cell, comes from myeloid structures. They make a first red blood cell. These give rise to, there's an L in there, early erythroblasts, also called basophilic blasts, because they fill like basic stuff. The early erythroblasts turn into late erythroblast, and then they turn into a normoblast. Yeah. Normoblasts make lots of hemoglobin, and then they eject out their nucleus and organelles to make room for all that hemoglobin. Once they pop out all the organelles, then they turn into what's called a reticulocyte. A reticulocyte is almost a red blood cell, but it still contains a few organelles. So we got to wait for those guys to die or get ejected, and then we have a fully mature erythrocyte. That whole thing, from stem cell to erythrocyte, takes about 3 to 5 days. So here's a picture to kind of help you see this. And what I'm going to do here is kind of make it bigger and then go through it a little bit. Whoa, not that big. Alright, so here's my stem cell, the hemocytoblast. So then he turns into a first erythroblast. And then he gets stimulated by a hormone called erythropoietin, and he turns into an erythroblast. This is all in the bone marrow. Then he turns into a normoblast, and he pops out his nucleus and he turns into a reticulocyte, which contains a few organelles. After he gets rid of those organelles, then he looks like a normal red blood cell, and then finally gets released into the bloodstream 3 to 5 days later. Kind of crazy. So we got to come up with a way to remember the myeloid stem cell, and then the hematocytoblast, proerythroblast, erythroblast, normoblast, reticulocyte, erythrocyte. Yeah, good stuff. Okay, what determines how quickly you make blood cells has to do with a lot of hormones. So the rate of blood production is regulated by hormones. It depends on supplies of iron, amino acids, and vitamin B12 and folic acid. So if you needed a recipe for making a red blood cell, this is what you would need: iron, amino acid, vitamin B12, and folic acid. So there's a protein hormone called erythropoietin, EPO for short. It's a hormone that in small amounts will circulate in the blood to help keep a minimal amount of blood going. So if you're a healthy individual, you make a certain amount of blood cells a day. But if you're sick or you just lost a whole lot of blood, then EPO is going to kick into gear and tell your body to make some more blood cells. Your kidney and your liver produce EPO since they're always constantly filtering your blood. They kind of keep track of how many blood cells you have and tell the EPO when to do its job. Your kidneys will produce EPO when oxygen levels are too low. So if you go live at higher elevations, Your body will detect the lower oxygen levels and then produce more blood cells in order to make up for it. Okay. Okay. So, so yeah, when you live at higher levels, you end up making more blood cells, which is why a lot of athletes like to go to higher levels to train to make more blood cells, and then when they come back to regular level, they have all those red blood cells that are there able to carry more oxygen and be a more efficient athlete. Causes of normal blood oxygen decrease. Oh, this is continuing why we make more blood cells. That sentence doesn't make any sense. I apologize. Basically, anytime, like if you hold your breath or for some reason you have a really bad pneumonia or something and you're not getting as much oxygen into your body, then your body will start EPO working so that way you can make some more blood cells. If you have lost some blood due to hemorrhage, which is mass bleeding, or destruction of your red blood cells, that'll cause more EPO to tell you to make more blood cells. If you live in, like I said, higher elevations, that'll cause you to make more. Or if you have an illness, it can cause you to make more. Aerobic exercise will cause you to make more red blood cells. And usually what happens is, oh my God, I want to hurt them. Causes them to mature more quickly. Alright, here's a little graphic that just kind of represents the homeostasis of red blood cell production. So you got hypoxia, which is lack of oxygen in your blood due to decreased red blood cell count, decreased availability of O2 to blood, increased tissue demand for oxygen, something that causes it to go out of balance. So there's reduced oxygen level in the blood. Your kidney picks that up, says, hey, time to kick out the EPO. The EPO goes to the red bone marrow, tells it to start increasing your production of red blood cells, increases the count of red blood cells, which gets your oxygen level back to normal, and hey, everything's hunky-dory. Okay, testosterone also increases EPO production in the kidneys, so the more you work out, the more red blood cells you make. And chemicals released by white blood cells, leukocytes, platelets, and reticular cells also stimulate red blood cell production. So there's lots of stuff that tells your body to make red blood cells. In your diet, in order to maintain the proper amount of red blood cells, you need proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, and iron. But you can't have just iron floating around in your blood because it's toxic, so it is stored inside your cells in the form of something called ferritin and hemosiderin. And then when your body is ready to use it, then we have transferrin, transfers the iron from the cells into the blood, delivers it to the newly formed blood cells. So ferritin and hemosiderin is kind of like a bank of iron, and transferrin will go deliver it to who needs it. Alright, what happens when your blood cells are done? Well, they only last about 100 to 120 days. They don't have a nucleus, so they can't divide, they can't reproduce. So they start to get old. They become stiffer, the hemoglobin begins to break down, and they go to the spleen, where it basically is like a little chop shop. Breaks it down into little bits and pieces. Macrophages, big eaters, come along. They destroy the old red blood cells, but the iron in it from the heme group is salvaged and reused, so we don't waste our iron, because we'd have to eat a lot more iron every day. The rest of the heme is degraded into bilirubin. Bilirubin is a yellow pigment that binds to albumin and travels to the liver. This is why babies, usually when they're born, their livers aren't functioning properly, and so as their blood cells are being broken down, their liver cannot break down the bilirubin, and it's kind of a yellowy pigment, which is what gives little brand new babies jaundice. It's also what causes older people or really sick people to turn yellow because their liver isn't working well enough to break down the bilirubin. Liver secretes bile into the intestines, where the bilirubin is broken down into stercobilin, and that's brown, which is what gives poop its distinctive color. So brown poo is mainly brown because of the breakdown of red blood cells. More for your knowledge. Alright, what happens if something's wrong with your red blood cells? Well, here's a whole bunch of disorders. We have anemia. A lot of people are anemic and don't even know it. It's when your blood has a lower oxygen carrying capacity. For some reason, it's just not carrying the amount of oxygen that it should. Hemorrhagic anemia is caused by massive blood loss. You accidentally chopped off your hand, you lost a lot of blood. You're in an injury, you lost a lot of blood. And so you're anemic, you don't have as much blood as you should, but your body could usually make up for it pretty quickly. Hemolytic anemia, hemo, blood, lytic, to burst. Your cells explode for random reasons, lots of different reasons, but if your cells are exploding, that can cause anemia. Aplastic anemia, this one's a bad one. This is, a lot of people die from this one. It's destruction of the bone marrow causing low hemoglobin. So there's a problem with the blood making factory, and if there's a problem at the source, you usually got bigger problems. It's kind of like a cancer in a way. Iron deficiency anemia. For some reason, you're not taking enough iron, so your blood doesn't have as much iron. You can't carry as much oxygen in your body. Pernicious anemia. You don't have enough of B12 in your diet, and B12 is important for proper blood cell functioning, or for some reason your intestines aren't absorbing the right amount of B12, therefore you can't make your oxygen or your blood cells work for you. So you just take some medicines that help you to absorb B12 better, takes care of it, no problem. This is usually either due to abnormal hemoglobin, which would be the deficient in B12, or genetic in origin, which, again, if you just take medicines to help you absorb the B12, you're usually okay. Polycythemia is another type of anemia. Poly, lots of, and then the site cell, emia in the blood, lots of blood cells. This is, as you can see from the picture here, too many red blood cells, and basically they clog everything up. Makes your blood like ketchup and thick, and it can't move as well, and it can't carry oxygen as well. Secondary polycythemia is just caused by living at higher elevations. Because of the lack of oxygen up there, your body makes more red blood cells to compensate. And then we have something called blood doping, which we'll probably hear about with the Olympics up, is artificially induced polycythemia, which is you go, like I said, the athletes go live at higher elevations to make more blood cells, and then when they come back down, then they have extra blood to carry extra oxygen, which makes them more efficient at carrying out cellular respiration. Okay, whew, that was a lot. Alright, so write that down and go listen to it again. You're probably going to need to absorb that a few times. Sorry that one was so quick. Alright, up next, white blood cells. Alright, have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.